I would like to extend a special welcome to all the students here this evening, as I'm very conscious that for many of you, this is the middle of the summer exam period. Thank you for coming. In the 1920s, F.C. Earnshaw, in his centenary history of the college, had commented, probably rather sourly, that it wasn't clear what was being commemorated by this oration. At least by the early 1980s, there was certainty. The festivities perpetuated the memory of all those who have made our college, our university, what it is. Those who founded the college, those who have endowed it, those who have taught and researched in it, and the great mass of students who have attended its classes have all taken part in building up that great incentive, that great force which we call the college tradition. At some time during the 2 decades following 1983, commemoration mysteriously disappeared, but it was triumphantly revived during 2004, the college's 175th anniversary year, when the oration was given by that great and much-loved King's alumnus, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. King's today is a vastly different institution from the Strand-based university of the 1920s, or even from 1983 or 2004. Our vision for the next great anniversary of 2029 is one based on 5 strategic priorities: education, research, an international community in the heart of London, and serving the world. Just today, London has been ranked as the best city in the world for university students to study in by the QS Higher Education Data Analysts, a huge accolade for our city. While acknowledging and respecting our history and traditions at King's, not least in our commitment to service, we are not constrained by them. We are able to build on them for a better future. The very distinguished list of commemoration orator speakers does not include many doctors or scientists, among the lawyers, theologians, historians, not to mention prime ministers, secretary-generals of the United Nations, and archbishops of Canterbury who have delivered the oration in the past. We have had some medical speakers, the last on a medical topic, Sir Cecil Wakely, then President of the Royal College of Surgeons, spoke on the influence of the British Isles on the advance of surgery during the last 150 years in 1950. Times change, and medical science is now in its most exciting period ever. This evening's extremely distinguished speaker will not be looking backwards but forwards to one of the many global challenges facing our society. She will also, dare I admit with a little shame, be only the 2nd female orator. And it may be appropriate to recognize her own leadership, not only across health, but in promoting gender equity across UK research. It gives me enormous pleasure to invite Sir Robert Leckler to introduce Dame Sally Davies.
Well, I'm delighted to be the person asked to introduce this evening's speaker. Dame Sally, like many of the best, graduated in medicine from Manchester University a couple of years before me. Apart from a brief diversion in Spain that I won't go into, Sally then went on to train as a hematologist, ending up as professor of hemoglobinopathy in North London, running a very successful research program, particularly focusing on sickle cell disease, an interest that she maintained for many years beyond that. Now, I first met Sally when she was regional director of NHS R&D for Northwest London. That was a few years ago. But if I say that from then she rose rapidly, that is a considerable understatement. So she went on to become the director of NHS R&D and the chief scientific advisor in the Department of Health in the year 2004. And in that role, she then pulled off a most remarkable feat. The NHS had an R&D budget for a number of years before this, and looking back, it was anomalously and rather indefensibly distributed around the country for all sorts of historic reasons. Indeed, the Hammersmith Hospital, where I worked, was the lucky recipient of £54 million of this money per annum. The dirty secret was that this money wasn't actually spent on research. It was spent offsetting hospital trust deficits. And people like me nobly tried to defend the justification for this money. But Sally has an unparalleled ability, I think, to see through, well, I won't use the word that would be impolite in this audience, but let's say called fudges. And so the remarkable feat that she pulled off was to get agreement from the Department of Health and the Treasury to reclaim this very substantial sum of money and genuinely reallocate it for research. And we are in her debt to this day, because that led to the formation of something called the National Institutes of Health Research, which has become a very big beast on the biomedical and health research funding landscape in the UK, now allocating £1 billion per annum in support of patient-based research. And that isn't important only in itself, but it's led to a transformation of the infrastructure in the NHS to conduct patient-based research in experimental medicine. And I would dare to say that that infrastructure that Sally oversaw the development of is as good as it gets anywhere on the planet. So I think it would be reasonable to conclude from all of that that Sally has had a greater impact on clinical research in the UK than anybody else in her generation. Now, from there, she went on to be appointed as Chief Medical Officer, as Ed has said, in year 2011. She's championed numerous causes in that role, including making all of us more conscious of how much alcohol we consume on a weekly basis. But the greatest impact, I think, that she has had, and the cause célèbre that she has really focused on in a classically and characteristically single-minded and effective way, is the one she's going to talk to us about tonight, antimicrobial resistance, highlighting what is one of the major threats to the human race. And just to say a word or two about the role that she's played here, she's advocated globally on this topic. She's spoken on AMR at numerous events, including the World Health Assembly, the G8 Science Ministers Meeting in 2015, the Global Health Security Initiative in 2015, the UN General Assembly in 2016. She was chair of the 2013 AMR Forum at the World Innovation Summit for Health and was for 3 years the chair of the WHO Strategic and Technical Advisory Group on AMR. Most recently, Dame Sally's been appointed a co-convener of the UN Interagency Coordination Group on AMR, set up in response to the declaration made at the General Assembly in 2016. So a really remarkable contribution and set of achievements. But on top of all that, as someone who's known Sally for quite some time, I'm able to say that she has a great characteristic of being very fond of fun and being a fun person to hang out with. So Sally, it's great to have you here this evening. We very much look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you very much, friend Robert. It is such a pleasure to be here, both as an alumnus with an honorary doctorate from King's, but actually as a colleague on so many things. Now, if I press, no, oh dear, yes, you know I'm not technically I'm not technically adept. So I want to talk to you about antimicrobial resistance. It's a ghastly name. We're talking about drug-resistant infections that threaten modern medicine. Thank you. And if we don't get this right, our grandchildren will risk going back to the pre-antibiotic era, where we would lose 20 to 30 years of our lifespan, and cuts on the face or anywhere could lead to infections that would kill us. But modern medicine is underpinned by antibiotics in particular Think about caesarean sections and joint replacements where prophylactic antibiotics are given. Think about cancer treatments, diabetes, people who are prone to infections. Without effective antimicrobials, they will not live. So this is the threat to modern medicine. And I want to talk about what we're doing. I'm not going to get into how I fell into this because it was not my intention. But we do have to sort this, and I'm so pleased you're all here because I'm recruiting you to helping sort this. Now, one of the very interesting things is how drug resistance spreads. So you get a resistant gene. It can be in the actual chromosomal DNA. It can be in a plasmid. It can be loose. And so you can understand that the mutations arise, the changes in that DNA, by chance, and then survival of the fittest, if there's an antibiotic or an antimicrobial there, and they can survive, they will perpetuate. They multiply, bacteria, every 20 minutes, so you can see how you suddenly get a big population. But they're much more clever. They have ways of handing DNA with that mutation to their aunts and uncles, their cousins, their friends. So not only do you have multiplication from the bug that had the mutation, they hand it around and their friends and relatives multiply. So you can see how in a person this becomes quite overwhelming if you haven't got a drug to treat them with. And we could go into, but I'm not going to bother about whether it's conjugation, transformation, or transduction. It is this picking up or moving around of the resistance genes that makes it such a problem. And actually, it is a big problem. So a group of 20 young Swedish men, before they went backpacking, had their microbiome looked at. No AMR genes. When they came back, 2/3 had AMR genes in their microbiome. Now, they were healthy young men, and within 6 to 9 months, they'll probably lose it. But if that was a middle-aged woman and she gets a urine infection, it's probably from her gut, her microbiome, and it's likely to be resistant. So these are all around us and worrying us. And we knew it was going to happen. Flemming, in his acceptance speech, talked about this. He talked about the risk of it happening and the fact it would cause deaths. And what we know, and that graph down on the right just shows you the direct relationship between use on the x-axis, I can never remember which it is, and on resistance on the vertical axis. And you can see that France has most resistance. And what that begins to tell you, as you look at it, is about the amount of use and how unregulated it is, even in Europe. As we write our next cross-government national UK strategy, I'm asking that we benchmark ourselves against the best. For hospital use, that's Sweden. For animal use, it's probably Norway. They use less than us, and they have less resistance than us. So that holy grail that came from the late 1940s of penicillin, we have not treated as a global good. We have used it for short-term gain. And we really are moving into a difficult problem. And this inappropriate use in humans is the biggest driver. I'm going to come on to animals and explain it. But think about Bangladesh, Nigeria. Most antibiotics there are bought perhaps one day at a time from a market stall or a kiosk. Even in southern Europe, though by regulation, they should only be supplied by prescription. We all know that you can walk into a pharmacist in Spain or Italy and say what you want and get it. I had dinner one evening in the residence of our ambassador to Rome, and I had been into a pharmacy and bought some just to try it out. And I said to the health minister, I'd done that. She said, no, you're lying. You can't. Of course. I smiled sweetly and thought, yes, that's why they don't get it right, because if you don't accept there's a problem, how can you put it right? But even in this country, here in the UK, we're overprescribing. And a recent study by Public Health England found at least 1 in 5 prescriptions are unnecessary. And all of this drives resistance, this overuse. The West are the biggest consumers, but developing countries are beginning to catch up. And they have a massive infectious disease burden. And they don't want to restrict access. So they have quite high levels of resistance, we believe. But sadly, there's not much data around. We have an ambition in the UK to reduce unnecessary prescribing by more than half by 2020-21, but it's going to be much harder in the low and middle income countries, and I can talk to you about some of the things we're doing if you want afterwards. But as I've alluded to, this overuse in humans and bad use is absolutely dwarfed by the overuse in the agriculture setting. So it's so disgusting, I still find it difficult to talk about. Most antibiotics are used in animals for growth promotion because it makes them grow. There's a new study in New England Journal of Medicine showing actually it works in humans too. I still have a hypothesis yet to be proven that one of the causes of obesity is poverty leading to more infections, leading to more antibiotics, leading to growth promotion. But that's for another day. So, over 70% of antibiotics go into animal husbandry, 75% or more is for growth promotion, and that's because they don't want to do good hygiene, good biosecurity. The EU banned growth promotion in 2006. Pressure has got the FDA in the States to ban certain important antibiotics important to humans from January 2017, and they moved in the States from letting farmers use antibiotics as they wanted to veterinary prescription. But there's really a lot to do. I thought that if we banned it for growth promotion, that's all right. No, they move into prophylaxis and prevention, and you still can get a lot of antibiotics. But even more horrid is this story. So we were at the Prince Mahidol conference in Thailand at the end of January, and my colleagues looking after human patients were telling me what hoops they have to go through to get hold of colistin for their patients. And you know, this pot, a kilo of colistin, was bought for less than £3 to put into animal feed as a growth promoter. So even as we begin to sort the human bit, people aren't sorting the animal bit. We set some targets in this country in 2014 to move to less than 50 milligrams per kilo of animal protein. And actually, we started at 62 milligrams. We're already, a couple of years early, at 45 milligrams per kilo. And I'm traveling the world singing the praise of our chicken industry because in 1 year they took out 71% of antibiotics and upped the protein yield by 11%. So this is a complex, wicked problem. And I just want to show you all the interrelations. I've talked a bit about the humans. I haven't yet mentioned fish farming. I'm getting into fish farming. I know quite a lot about it now. I've even vaccinated fish by hand in Norway. Most fish farmers just tip antibiotics in with the feed straight into the nets or the lagoons, wherever they're growing them. And then they seep out into the environment, the rivers, the oceans. Exeter University is doing some very nice study of drug-resistant E. coli in the surfing waters off the university, and every year the E. coli resistance levels rise by a log. It's quite scary. What the Norwegians have shown, and the Scots now do the same for salmon and trout, is that you can do a mixture of 3 vaccines, vaccinate them when they're tiny, that's what I did, and then the protein yield goes up dramatically and you hardly need antibiotics. Fantastic what they can do. But it all works round through the sewage water into agriculture and spraying. Did you know that many battleships have tetracycline, an antibiotic sprayed into their paint so that barnacles won't stick? Wildlife can pick up levels of antibiotics or the resistant organisms. Pets, as I call companion animals, of course are treated with antibiotics and have direct contact and can bring it round. And animal husbandry, I've already mentioned, and of course drug-resistant bugs in the animal system, whether it's chickens, pork, beef, whatever, feed back through the food chain into how we prepare food and everything there. So that just demonstrates the complexity and makes you begin to realize that the research agenda is massive. It's cross-sectoral, it's behavioral, and we need all parts of society to engage. And we just wanted to focus a bit on the fish farm bit because it is so horrible, and across the world, as the population grows, the protein production that's going up fastest to feed them is fish, not meat. So this is terribly important. And we've got studies showing how the drug resistance genes are passed around, going from fish to humans, out into the effluent and back round. This is very scary. But I didn't really focus, as I went through the complexity, on the environment. I can tell you that at the pilgrimage time in India, the Ganges has levels of colistin that we try and get in our plasma of our patients. I can horrify you with stories like this. A primary school class in China where they'd been prescribed no antibiotics in the preceding 3 months, and 19 of the children had antibiotic residues in their urine. This is a problem that we have to deal with, and it's costing. So at the moment, this is work from the review that I persuaded the Prime Minister Cameron to commission from Jim O'Neill, now Lord Jim O'Neill. A conservative estimate suggests that at least 700,000 people are dying across the world each year. Now, how many died of Ebola? It was a few thousand. How many die of road traffic accidents? It is amazing that 700,000 a year, because we're so used to it, because there's no label, because it's very difficult to code for, so the number is modelled and rather than counted, doesn't seem to worry people. And what Jim did was begin to look at who it was impacting, the young, the old, the pregnant, the immune-compromised, and those of you who are medical would recognise that, and begin to think about the cost to society. And it is because of all of this that I was given by the Chancellor Osborne £265 million to set up the Flemming Fund to assist low-income countries build capacity and capability for surveillance, so we'd have a much better handle on what's going on around the world. And indeed from that, jointly with the Wellcome Trust and the Gates Foundation, we've funded the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle to collect the AMR data and put it into the global burden of disease. We've funded the Big Data Institute to collect data from pharmaceutical companies that collect it. And then we should have a map and begin to get much more feel for what's going on. Of course, one of the great things about the global burden of disease is it's transparent, it's open to everyone on the web, and they have wonderful visualizations. So I think that should take us forwards. And it was great to get Bill Gates involved as well. And the IHME are Bill Gates' biggest grantee ever. So, how do we balance the fact that in the north, the developed world, we've got this excess use with the access issue? I highlighted that the use in low-income countries and middle-income countries is growing, and of course it needs to grow because more people die because of infections that could be treated than die at the moment of drug-resistant infections. But, you know, one of the problems in humans, just like in animals, is antibiotics and antimicrobials should not be used instead of good health, good public health. So in animals, it's sanitation, hygiene, biosecurity, and in humans, you know, it's clean water and sanitation, it's all of that. Diarrhea is claiming 1.1 million lives each year. It's the second most common cause of death in children, and 60% of that could be got rid of just by safe water to drink and cook with and sanitation. So it's not just drugs we need, but we've got to invest in prevention, which is sanitation, it's infection control, it's vaccination, and in behavioural education. We have an additional problem that we've discovered. I have to say about this that every time I lift up a stone, I find some other complexity I wasn't expecting. That global production of old antibiotics, penicillin V, penicillin G, some of these old ones, is dropping off, and we're down to one factory maybe for the world. It's because they sell so very cheaply and they've kind of been monopolized. Even routine ones for here, Pip-Taz, which is used a lot in leukemia patients and patients with sepsis, is made in one factory in China that had a fire last year. We had insufficient supply for 9 months in the NHS. So even on quite strong antibiotics, the supply, because of the economics of it, has been so concentrated, it is unsafe. And the off-patent old ones, we have far too few. So much that I think we may end up having to fund some factories through the NHS or something. And then there's the quality issue. 50% of drugs sold on the internet are counterfeit. But if you go and look in low and middle income countries at the drugs sold in pharmacies and in markets, a lot of them are counterfeit. Between 10 and 30% of drugs across the world are counterfeit, and antibiotics make up 50 to 60% of those. And it's not just that it's chalk and it doesn't work. A lot of the time, there's a little bit of the active substance, and that little bit will drive resistance because you're not killing the bugs, you're giving them this wonderful soup where they can make resistance and multiply. It is said that one of the Southeast Asian countries did national procurement of antimalarials and thought they had a very bad resistance problem. And then someone checked the drugs and discovered they were all counterfeit. And if they bought the right drugs, they would work. So imagine the cost to a human. You get a set of TB drugs and you're taking sugar instead of the drug. It's just not fair. It's not right. So the buzzword in global health at the moment is UHC, universal health coverage. Combating AMR will need universal health coverage. One can't work without the other, but actually we're going to have to look at how we get appropriate use in these poor countries as they develop their systems, because otherwise the resistance levels will get worse and worse. And so that will need a systems approach and an educational approach of those who are prescribing, which is quite different from the ones we've got at the moment. In this country and across the rich countries, we already know that treatment increases the cost, costs of patients with resistance is dramatically increased. I use the kind of expression, it doubles the hospital stay, it doubles the cost, and it doubles the mortality. But we've actually got some data here. What is important is it's expensive already in this country and every other country, and that we don't code properly in this country or any other country, so we don't know how many patients have got it. And then you add to that the problem that people, doctors and nurses, don't tell families, your father died of a drug-resistant infection in general. They say, oh, it was very difficult to treat and your poor father died, you know. So it is a kind of hidden iceberg there in the NHS, though there was a lot of news about the woman who, in the States who died of gonorrhea last year, having tried 27 antibiotics. This is here, and it's here to stay. So you could say, well, we'll solve it with new drugs. And clearly we need innovation, and new drugs are part of it, diagnostics are part of it, infection prevention. Why is it that every 5 to 7 years we see MRSA going up in our NHS hospitals? It's because we've forgotten how to wash hands. We have a campaign, it drops, it goes along, and then it rises again. This is really multisectoral. But, you know, we haven't had any new classes of antibiotics come into clinical use since the late 80s. We've had variants, and there are some in the pipeline. In fact, a study done by the WHO and the Pew Foundation shows there are 51 new antibiotics and biologics in clinical development to treat priority antibiotic resistance pathogens. So you might think, well, that's rather good. But only 8 of those are classed as innovative treatments, adding value to what you can see here. And, as Patrick Valence explained to me quite carefully a couple of years ago, the failure rate for new antibiotics and antimicrobials is much higher than it is for other drugs. It's something to do with plasma levels needing to be higher and side effects. And anyway, those 8 will take, whichever 1 or 2 come through, will take another 10 to 20 years. We've got a real void in our treatment options for multi-drug resistant TB, extreme drug resistant TB, drug-resistant E. coli and Klebsiella, and you can see them coming up. And we've got this because we've got market failure. We pay many thousands of pounds for a single course of cancer treatment, and treatment may be 6 courses. Hospitals think it's expensive if you pay £150 for a course of antibiotics. The difference can be tenfold. It just is why no one has bothered to invest. Indeed, when I first became interested in this subject about 5 years ago, I discovered that all the companies were just stopping investing in R&D in this area. Some of them are beginning to come back in because they think we might solve the market failure, and we can talk about delinkage and clever economic models. It's proving very difficult to solve. It actually needs some cash. But as Jim O'Neill said, not much cash compared with what it took to sort out the banks when they went bust. But we also, for instance, in this country, disinvested in research and microbiologists. So we're having to rebuild all of that. Academic microbiology is not a big issue. So where is this taking us? It's taking us to risk modern medicine and to a cost. And Jim O'Neill's team, and Hala Audi, who led it, has just come in. She worked out of the Wellcome Trust with a very effective team with Jim, modelled that if we didn't do anything by 2050, we'd have 10 million deaths a year. That would outrank cancer, diabetes, and everything. So there was a prediction in that it would cost up to $100 trillion by 2050. I don't understand what that means, and the way Jim explained it to me is we'd lose the equivalent of the UK GDP to the world's global output every year. Now, when this was published, everyone said, no, you're over-egging it. It's not that bad. You Brits are just, making too much of this. So we persuaded the World Bank to have a look at it, and we made sure that Sweden, Norway, our friends, helped fund them. And what they showed was that GDP will decrease by up to 3.8%. Importantly, that this reduction would be in low-income countries, it would hit them greatest, and it would push an extra 28.3 million people into extreme poverty. So actually they came up with more horrific data, and what they then said was, oh gosh, the objective of the World Bank is to alleviate poverty, we'd better take this on and do something. So they are beginning to work in this area, though it's been quite a struggle to pull them into it. And these are the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you're an SDG aficionado, which I'm learning to be, if only because it's UN speak, you can see that we won't deliver a lot of them if we don't sort out AMR. So let's go a bit into that. We've got to have a terrific amount of coordination across sectors, across countries, private, public, everywhere, if we're going to solve it. We need to it puts the achievements of other SDGs, such as reducing hunger, improving health, clean water and sanitation, directly at risk. So it's not just the one on health, number 3, that we might not get. We've already discussed how it can impact on poverty and economic growth, and SDGs will assist in reducing the consequences. So this is a really worrying area that is bigger than just new drugs. It's complex, as I've shown you, and unless we engage every sector of society, going beyond just new antibiotics, we're never going to get on top of this. So, on to the fight, and how are we taking this forward? It's been a slow fight. When I started on this in 2013, as a result of my first Chief Medical Officer annual report, I said, why has something not happened? And people said, well, the WHO has passed a few resolutions and written some reports. I said, yes, it's easy to write reports. What's happened? And it actually took about 50 years to get those, to get resolutions to have any bite. And we went and led as a member state a resolution in 2014. At the time the SDGs were agreed in 2015, we'd gone back working with the WHO to get them to agree across all 194 member states a global action plan, and every country signed up. It is wonderful how you can sign up and then some people don't do anything, to develop a national action plan and take action. And as that clearly wasn't enough, we thought from Britain that we'd go to the UN General Assembly to a high-level meeting. And it was very interesting when we got in 2016 to the UN General Assembly, the high-level week when heads of state are there, because they've done HIV there, and they'd had non-communicable diseases at a weekend, so not during it. And everyone said, why are we doing AMR? And I would stand there and say, because we should, because we need to, because we've pushed it. And they said, yeah, but where are the patients, the public? Because they respond to public and patient pull, and this was very technical. But we got a high-level meeting. We got a resolution, which was negotiated by Mexico. A lot of people played a role, and that, in fact, set up the international response. In particular, this interagency coordination group, the IACG, and I'll come on to that, but it brought together the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Organization for Animal Health, and of course at that point we hadn't realized we also needed the UN Environment Programme. So, as a nation, we took it to G20. David Cameron and Theresa May are both well briefed on this. They can talk to other world leaders, and they do. Justin Trudeau's very strong on it. Angela Merkel has been fantastic on it. We've taken it to G7. I'm very proud of being European. I stood up in Brussels and explained one reason I was proud is because we have the best regional AMR strategy of anyone. We work with health ministers in Geneva. That's the Alliance of Champions to keep this on the agenda. We work with permanent representatives, our ambassadors in New York. So what you're seeing is that we have mobilized as a government on this issue, not just the Department of Health, but actually the Department of Agriculture and the Environment, our aid agency, DFID, and our Foreign Office. We are using diplomacy to try and push this, and it is coming into all the discussions of universal health coverage, and we've brought in now the Environment Agency to take it forwards. But this is complex. And that resolution at the UN set up this incomprehensible IACG with a secretariat by what's called the tripartite, who have a big interest in it. All of the kind of bodies with an interest, except not quite all of them because we didn't get UNICEF. The Margaret Chan, the Director General of the WHO, fought the Secretary General hard to make sure, unusually for the UN, it wasn't just agencies, it was international experts. We have two chairs, Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General, and the DG for the WHO, Tedros. And then they've appointed 3 co-conveners, and you can see one of them is me. So, of course, I'm now driving this committee. And it takes all of Britain's diplomacy and energy to make it happen, because actually the UN system does not like delivery. It's good at talking. We've had a lot of support pro bono from actually McKinsey's, and what they did was look at the Global Action Plan, talk to me and then 200 experts and say, the Global Action Plan is not really as comprehensive as you need, because we've discovered this stuff about the environment, we talk much more about diagnostics. So they designed this framework for action for us to use, which we now do, which has in it content areas, levers, enablers, and you can see how everything fits, and our Global Action Plan maps across it. So let me just show you some of the things that we've been doing, both locally in this country and abroad. We've been increasing awareness, and here I want to recognise Jonathan Grant, who is actually the senior author on The Drugs Don't Work, which we did together with a microbiologist. It's now in Japanese, and neither of us have seen it, but it is in Japanese, and Jonathan has a copy of it in Italian, which I don't have, so I'm looking forward to receiving it. So we set out to inform the world. But also, some of you may have seen the antibiotics singing and dancing on television, telling people look after them because they might not be there otherwise. The research in focus groups with people was that if we said, listen to your doctors, and the doctor said, you don't need an antibiotic, they thought we were trying to save money because the NHS was short of money. So we have the antibiotics telling them. And you can see various other things. eBug is a school children's package produced by Public Health England in 28 countries, 15 languages, and is much loved and used around the world. But I think, for me, one of the most interesting bits of all of this is how people, consumers, are beginning to drive this. So actually, in Norway, it is a cancer sufferer who is the face of AMR and is pushing for action. And I've convened a group of all our major charities to come together later this month so that we can look at how they can provide a face for this, because sure as hell, their patients, their groups are going to die if we don't get it right. But other ways of looking at it, the equivalent of which in the States has pushed for antibiotic-free meat, and we can go into the niceties, but what they mean is no growth promotion or prophylaxis. And they publicly label people. So now I have to tell you that McDonald's are doing a good job. They have actually said they will pull antibiotics out of their chickens by, I think it's the end of next year, and everything else by a year or two after. And this transparency and league tables is having a massive impact. In fact, there's also a group in this country, a major group of investors who are refusing to invest in companies where the animal husbandry is not strong. I never thought I'd be asked to go and talk at investment conferences, at least not when it's about, growing food, but I'm off to talk at it, to explain why they shouldn't invest in it, why antibiotics are important for humans. And you will see in the States and increasingly here that restaurants and fast food chains are using as a marker of quality, no antibiotics are not used. But of course, we also need to engage communities, women's groups in Bangladesh like that, women's groups in the UK. We need to find ways. We need to do all of this to reduce use in the food chain. We need to do all of this to reduce dependency on antibiotics. And that can be by infection prevention and control, washing hands, but it's also by vaccinations. If you use a pneumococcal vaccine, then you will need less antibiotics to treat pneumococcus. If you use a flu vaccine, then there will be less bacterial infections happening in people who have flu. So it's not just vaccines for bacteria that protect our antibiotics. Universal coverage with pneumococcal vaccine could avert 11.4 million days of antibiotic use every year in children under 5. So we need to work on all of these issues, and industry has a big role to play. So DFID and the Netherlands were supportive and funded the NGO Access to Medicines initiative to look at stewardship and antibiotic development in pharma. And this is available on the web. It was published at Davos in January. What I particularly want to show you is the next slide, where you can see that GSK and Shionogi in particular have actually decoupled paying their sales reps by the amount they sell. So they are looking at stewardship and appropriate use and moving to reimbursing and paying their bonuses by knowledge rather than volume. That's terribly important, and we need to move others into exactly the same way. So, as we reach the bewitching hour, I'm just going to show you a few things that we've done here. One is between Public Health England and the Royal College of General Practitioners, a treatment kit that's used all over the world called Target so that people use them properly. Another Public Health England piece of work that some of you may have signed up to, I have, to be an antibiotic guardian. So you could all go home, and when you're bored, you could Google PHE Antibiotic Guardian and sign up. I've already told you how well we're doing at reducing the use of antibiotics in animal protein, with a 21% reduction already in a couple of years, and high priority antibiotics are at less than 1% of sales for animals. I'm very proud of what we've done, investing in R&D across the world, more than 350 million since 2014, funding 20 million, 22.5 million, better get it right, with China, and they're funding the same. Because of that joint work, colistin resistance was found. They banned it for animal use. Program of 8 million matched funding from us and India, and funding from others, as well as a lot of work with JPIMR, Joint Programming Initiative, run by the Medical Research Council, and 2 new calls live at the moment in that for surveillance networks and a virtual institute. And so on, you can see working with PDPs, the Longitude Prize for a diagnostic, our Innovation Fund. We announced about 10 days ago, a global AMR partnership with Canada on R&D anywhere in the world, focusing on livestock and aquaculture, trying to get it better. And then all funded in a One Health approach. I'm not going to have time to talk to the Flemming Fund. I mentioned it, helping low-income countries, but I have to say that our team are doing a wonderful job, and it does help us. There are researchers in the audience, so here we are. Lots of live things to apply for, and coming soon, Robert Leckler, as president of our Academy of Medical Sciences, is overseeing a gift that the Hamid Foundation, Yusuf Hamid and Farid, gave to me for them to set up bilateral partnership visiting professors between UK and India. Novo Nordisk has set up a fund of $100 million US. It really is exciting. So, I started this in 2014. And when I did, everyone said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because I want to leave the world a better place for my grandchildren." We don't have any, but maybe we will. And we owe it, with our values as doctors, to protect modern medicine so that it can develop and be yet better. We actually have a great industry, but they've been driven out of this area because of the way we've structured things. We need to work in true partnership with them, and we need to bring everyone together, whether it is industry or civil society, with governments, with the professionals. And I find it very odd that I, as the Chief Medical Officer, now travel the world talking about fish farming. I've visited fish farms, not only in Norway, but in Singapore, and talking about animal husbandry and how chickens are brought up in Vietnam, one conversation recently. But if we don't, each and every one of us, move out of our comfort zone and take action, it will be too late. And then we would have destroyed something that is a global good, and we would regret it. And as I finish, I want to give tribute here to King's College and to colleagues who work here, because a lot of the work over the years has been supported by Jonathan Grant and Jennifer Rubin in particular, the thinking, the way of framing it, the way I could use the international community and work it. And without friends like that to help me, and Saba Hendricks and others in the Policy Institute here at King's College, we would not be where we are. And I do want to put on record my thanks to you, because I think we've done pretty well, but not well enough. We've got a long way to go. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm Jonathan Grant, and I have the pleasure of giving the vote of thanks tonight. As Sally said, I'm also the co-author of the book, The Drugs Don't Work, and I just checked, it's $4.99 on Amazon, so feel free to get a copy. $2.99 on the Kindle version as well. Ed, in his introduction, talked about the history of this oration, and a couple of facts I dug out is that it's traditional, apparently, not to take questions after the oration. You'll be glad to hear, Sally. I did query this, and the response I got was that the orator is so qualified in her topic, it would be wrong to actually question her on anything. So I'm not quite sure I buy into that argument, but I think, as we have seen tonight, Sally, your knowledge of your topic, your brief, both from a scientific point of view and a policy point of view, is uncontestable. The other important historical fact is when the commemoration ended, there was free beer and cake. That was how it was celebrated. You will be glad or not to know that we have progressed, and we now serve wine and canapes. And the wine and canapes will be upstairs in chapters, and there will be people at the back to show you where to go. And I'm sure Sally would be delighted to take questions over the modern equivalent of beer and cake. It is a personal honour, an absolute personal honour, to be asked to give this vote of thanks. About 4 years ago, almost to the date, Sally kindly did the same for me when I was giving my inaugural lecture in this same room on a very different topic on science policy. So it feels somewhat circular to be able to do this evening. A bit like Robert, I've known you for around 20 years. We first met when you took on the role at North Thames R&D. And over that time, you have been a mentor, a friend, a collaborator, a disruptor, and I think a doer. And I think that's what I most admire about the time we've worked together, is the way you get things done. And you get things done by combining the evidence, by combining the science with a very sophisticated nous for what works politically. And it's that combination of the science and the politics and the evidence which I think is quite unique. And I think you have absolutely demonstrated that sort of skill through the story you've gone through today. This was not, it's hard to remember this was not on the agenda in any sense of the word 6 years ago. Politicians did not know about this. Scientists did. Flemming knew about it. He knew about it in 1945. Scientific community knew about it. But general public did not know about it. Policymakers did not know about it. Politicians did not know about it. And now we have UN resolutions. We have groups globally working on this topic. For all the reasons you have seen this evening, this is extremely important. But globally, and there's not many people you get to say this to, but I do think the world can be grateful to you, Sally, for getting this on the agenda. Because if it was not on the agenda, it would no longer, would still not be there. Robert mentioned in his introduction the creation of NIHR. I just want to reflect on that because that is in itself transformative. It has changed the way in this country that we fund biomedical and health research, and lots of other countries fund or are trying to emulate that system that you helped put together before you took on the CMO role. I mention that because I think you could say that the sort of the AMR story is a sort of one kid wonder, you know, so this is it. But you've got a track record of making these changes and making these fundamental changes, combining evidence, combining science, and combining policy. So on that note, I do realize I'm standing between you and your beer and cake. So I just want to thank you once again, Sally, for taking the time and coming and sharing your thoughts with us this evening. Maybe we can give you one final round of appreciation, and then we can go for that beer and cake.